get started. Well, I want to welcome everybody to this webinar. We're going to be talking about something that every team has, whether we want to think about it intentionally or not. We have multiple personalities on our team that are trying to accomplish something together. So every person comes into a team with different experiences, their communication preferences, the expectations, work habits, personalities, different, you know, ways of growing up and different ways of approaching problems, right? And those differences are incredibly valuable. So we don't want to diminish the different perspectives because they really help us see things that we may not have considered. They really allow people to contribute in their different strengths. But at the same time, those differences can also create friction, right? Sometimes we find ourselves thinking, why do they do it this way? Or why can't they just communicate more clearly? Why does everything have to be so difficult with this person, right? So today really isn't about figuring out who is right and who is wrong. And it definitely is not going to be about making everybody on the team the same, right? More alike. It's really about understanding what happens when we have these different personalities and the work styles that really come together and how we can navigate those differences without allowing them to create division and create that friction on the team. So while some of you may be leading teams, everything we talk about today really applies to everyone on the team, whether you're a leader or a member of the team. But before we get started, I want you to put one word in the chat that just how does it or what makes working with different personalities challenging? What do you think? Why the communication? Yeah. Ethics, the different approach. Yeah, we all have a different way of doing things, right? And so we all have these, yeah, maybe different values, the different backgrounds that we have. Exactly. All of these things come together, and we have these conflicting aspects that really make it difficult sometimes to be one team together, knowing that we're all trying to make it to this goal, but we all have maybe different ways of doing it, right? So, one of the first ways, or the first things I really want us to recognize is that having different personalities and different approaches does not mean that it's dysfunctional. We really tend to notice these differences when someone does something differently than we would. Maybe you like to have everything organized and planned a certain way, like well in advance, and someone else is perfectly comfortable figuring things out as they go. All right, I'm one of those that likes to have things organized and planned, and I know Anita is too. We have people on our team that are perfectly fine with, hey, I'm just going to take this book and we're just going to discuss it. And they are amazing at that. I could never do that, but that's okay. We are different, right? Maybe you process things internally and want some time before answering a question, while someone else likes to think out loud and think with somebody. Maybe you prefer to just get straight to the point, while another person wants to kind of think through some time talking through the context of what's going on, right? So all those differences show up in the communication style, right? The work pace that we have, the personality, how we're making these decisions, and how we are responding to the conflict. And here's the problem that sometimes begins. We start describing the difference and start judging the difference. So instead of saying, well, they just work carefully, we start saying things like, well, they're really careless. Instead of saying, well, they want more information, we think they just want to overthink everything. Instead of saying, well, they're direct, we think they're rude. Instead of saying, hey, we want this flexibility, well, they're actually just disorganized. So the goal is not to make everyone work the same, right? The same way. The goal is really to help people work together despite the differences that we have. We should not expect everyone on our team to think, communicate, and contribute in exactly the same way. We need to be able to create that room for different people to contribute effectively. So, if the differences are normal, where does that team tension actually come from? There's actually several common places that team tension comes from. And the first one is communication. We have different preferences and styles. Some people like to email, right? Some people like to use Teams. Some people text. Some people are just, they're going to call you no matter what, even if it's just, hey, I just have a quick question. One person wants constant updates, and another person believes, like, hey, if there's a problem, I'm going to let you know, right? So we have that communication style, the preferences that kind of can create that tension on the team. The second one is priorities. We have competing goals and a focus. Two people can be both working extremely hard, but believe completely different things should come first, right? Then we have clarity. These are those unclear roles and maybe those expectations. Sometimes what looks like maybe a personality conflict is actually that there's unclear roles. They don't understand what they should own versus what someone else should own. There's unclear expectations. You might have a boss who's saying, "Hey, just get this done," but then you get it done and they're like, hey, that wasn't how I was expecting it to be done, or I expected it to have this involved in it. Well, you never gave those clear expectations. You can't meet a goal if you have unclear expectations. So really those priorities, or maybe even having that unclear decision-making authority. We also have work styles. Unclear is unkind. Exactly. Yep. Unclear is unkind. We have to be clear in order to be kind and be respectful to those people, right? So the work styles, we have different ways of getting things done. We may have very different definitions of what on time is, what complete or ready means. And so it goes back to those expectations and the clarity, and maybe making sure that we have those priorities and the communication and all of that. And then we have assumptions. So we have these different perspectives and the interpretations of how things are happening. So this one in particular is important because assumptions often we take like an ordinary situation and we make it personal sometimes. So if someone responds differently than I would, I might immediately assign meaning to their behavior. Well, they didn't really talk to me in this meeting. They must not like me, or they didn't really say anything about, the task that we need to complete. Well, they probably don't care about the task, right? We can make assumptions about everything, and we do. And so one of the things that our team says is go ahead, make the assumptions. We're all going to have them. You made an assumption whenever you got on here of what's going to happen today on this webinar. And we just need to be making sure that our assumptions are challenged and that we're actually seeing what is actually happening, not just making the assumption and guiding our behavior based off of that. Because whenever we are making an assumption, we're no longer responding to what's only happened. You're responding to what you believe it means, right? And so that is why not every team tension is actually like a personality problem, all of these things. Sometimes it's the clarity, sometimes it's the expectations, the workload, the communication style. And so, really, before we start deciding, like, hey, this person's just difficult, it's worth really asking ourselves what's actually creating the tension. So, looking at these five dynamics of the team tension, what is one that you think causes the most tension on teams? Is it the communication, clarity, assumptions, work styles, priorities, assumptions? Yeah, I agree. I think that all of these really play a role, right? The work styles. And I think a lot of the times we can make assumptions about so many different things. And then also we have um, the work styles that just there's just different things that we like to get done different ways, right? Okay, so now this slide gets at something that we all do. we can have a thing that happened and we tell ourselves a story. So something happens and our brain just fills in the rest of the story, right? So someone doesn't respond to an email. What's the story that you tell yourself? I know what story I tell myself. Is there a story that you tell yourself whenever someone just doesn't respond? Yeah, they don't care, right? Yeah, they don't respect my time. They hate me. Yep, they're ignoring me. They just, yeah, how rude, right? And even though we know sometimes our emails get so backed up that sometimes it does take a little bit of like, hey, just checking in on this because I know for myself, I can definitely miss an email. I don't know about anybody else, but I definitely can. Okay, what if they asked several questions in a situation? You are in a meeting and they're just asking all these stinking questions. Well, that might be interpreted depending, okay, unclear, right? They're unclear, but they also, you could, depending on the frame of mind, you could be thinking, well, they're challenging me. They want to know why I'm doing this, and they are going to try to pick procrastination getting started. Yeah, they just want to make sure that we're never going to get started on this, right? What if they change the plan? You had all of this going on and they changed the plan. Well, you might think, hey, they didn't even ask me. I'm in charge of this, but they didn't even ask me. They don't value my input in this situation, right? Or maybe, like I've said already, they were quiet in the meeting. So obviously, they just don't care about this. And one of the challenges that we face is that once we create that story, we start behaving as though that story is true, even though we may not be correct at all. And so now I kind of want to walk through um, this. We might walk into the next interaction that we have with that person, maybe defensive. We come with that defensive background, right? You may stop asking that person for input because you just know that you're going to get 50 questions. You may vent about them to someone else. You might interpret everything they do through that story that you've already created in your head. So, one of the most useful questions that we can ask ourselves when we feel this tension of the story being created is what do I actually know versus what am I assuming? That doesn't mean your interpretation is always wrong. Sometimes we just have that gut feeling that something is going on. Yeah, your mind starts to play tricks on you. Yeah, exactly. If you don't know the whole story about what's happening behind the scenes, your brain does create a story for you to believe. But checking that assumption and the story that we're telling ourselves allows us to actually respond to the situation rather than reacting to our interpretation of the situation. So, let's move on. This leads directly into how we're talking about different situations. Sometimes we turn a behavior into a personality, and then that conversation really becomes much harder. So if we say something like, "Hey, you're difficult," there really isn't any action behind that. And we can say, hey, we just keep leaving meetings without clear decisions. Reframing it to where there's actually an action behind it. We don't need to leave this meeting without a clear decision. Or, hey, you're controlling. I've already made a judgment about who you are, right? That is a behavior that you've turned into a personality. And so compare that to, hey, these decisions are being made before everyone has had an opportunity to weigh in on it. And sometimes we may not have the opportunity to weigh in on a situation. But instead of thinking that they're controlling, let's frame it as something actionable. Or, hey, he's just unreliable. Well, instead, turn it into an action where we've missed the last two agreed upon deadlines. You have something specific that you can actually talk about. A behavior can change, right? Expectations can be clarified. We can have the processes that can change. But when you label someone's personality, the other person is much more likely to feel personally attacked and become defensive. So whether you're a leader that's giving feedback or a team member addressing an issue with a colleague, try to describe like what actually happened. What was the impact of that situation and what needs to be different next time? Which one would you rather hear? You're not a team player. Or, hey, when decisions are made involving the group, people don't have an opportunity to contribute before we move forward. It's the same issue, but instead of turning it about their personality, you are turning it into a different conversation uh, about what happened, what's the impact, and what needs to be different. So these different personalities will create that tension, right? So we have that the tension is not the same as that team division. Division gets created by what we do with the tension. So one of the biggest ways that happens is when we stop talking to the person and start talking about the person, right? We avoid the person, but we're talking about them. So I'm frustrated with one colleague, but instead of talking with them, I talk to someone else about them. Then maybe I talk to another person. I start looking for validation in my thinking, right? I want to be right, so I'm going to talk to different people. Then that other person realized what's happening, and now they have people to talk to. Well, what began as a disagreement between two people because becomes an us versus them. You're recruiting others, you're assuming intent without asking. And then it becomes that division on the team. You're letting that resentment build. You're communicating through other people. You're not talking to each other, but now y'all are talking to other people, and it's becoming that us and versus them dynamic. We can also create division whenever we are, yeah, exactly. And it only takes one person that's negative on a team to just completely sour the whole team, right? It's so easy to do that. So we really can create this division in so many different ways where what starts out as that tension, it's now a division. And I do want to make a distinction here. There's nothing wrong with seeking maybe a perspective. Sometimes you need to talk to like your leader, a mentor, a trusted colleague. But the question is, are you talking about them to help you move forward toward a resolution or because you just want them to agree with your side? That's a very different purpose. The phrase that I want you to remember is talk to people, not about people. Okay. So, really, I want to ask you a question, and it's just a yes or no. Have you ever watched a small disagreement become a much larger team issue because other people got pulled into it? Disagree, but commit to the mission. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Something that started off, it like really wasn't that big of a deal over the break room. Man, that's crazy. I mean, something that really is not that big of an issue, or you made a story in your head and you're like, Anita, she obviously hates me. She did this, and I'm gonna go talk to Jason about it. Well, now I'm talking about Anita, which I love Anita, so this is completely fake. But like now everybody on the team now thinks Anita hates me, and then we're gonna go through that way. We're gonna address the situations through that lens, and everybody's on my side, obviously, right? I'm just kidding, Anita. But it can quickly become that from that normal tension into that division. And so, what do we actually do when that tension shows up? And this is a framework that I want to leave you with today. It's just clear. All right. First, check your assumptions. What do you know versus what are you assuming? What are you interpreting? What story have you created in your head? The second, listen for their perspective. Not listen so that you can respond. Actually listen to understand. What might you be missing? You could say questions like, hey, help me understand what you were thinking. I guess that's not a question, that's a statement. Help me understand what you were thinking. Or the question, what am I missing from your perspective? You don't have to agree with that person's perspective to try to understand it. E, explain the impact. This is really where you are focusing on that behavior. You're describing the behavior that you saw and its impact. So it's a lot more productive than you always change everything, right? It's when the information changed after I'd already completed the work, I had to redo several things. And so changing it into the focus on behavior. And then align on what matters. What are we actually trying to do? What's the mission, right? What's the vision of what we're trying to accomplish? What outcome are we both trying to achieve? Sometimes we can disagree strongly on the approach to do it, but if we just want the same exact outcome, that really brings us back to that shared goal, and it can kind of lower the temperature of that conversation. Then we have R, reset the way forward. What do we actually need from each other to go forward, right? What do we need to do differently? What is the expectation going forward? And that final step matters because a productive conversation should lead somewhere, right? We don't have to have a 30-minute conversation about why we are frustrated and then leave without anything changing. We need to have something that's going to change. We've checked our assumptions, we've listened for their perspective, we've explained the impact of maybe that happening. We align on the mission, the outcome that we want, and then we have something, yes, an action plan, exactly. You have something that is going to lead somewhere. It's a productive conversation. So this is also another important piece because team culture is not something that a leader creates just by themselves. We know that a leader can say, hey, I want us to act on these values. And if every person on the team is not acting that way, it's not going to work. You're not going to have the culture that you want, right? Every single person on the team is a part of building that culture. So as a team member, you own your conversation, the assumptions. Yeah, lead by example, exactly. You own the follow through, the reactions that you have, the way that you address concerns, and also creating space for others to contribute and be heard, right? You own how you can contribute to the culture around you. But leaders have a responsibility to own additional responsibilities other than just these. They also own what the team members own, right? But they also have to provide clear expectations. You need to have that role clarity with the responsibilities. Establish those team norms that you are going to hold to, hold people accountable. The addressing those unhealthy patterns that develop, right? Leaders have a responsibility to address them. But a leader cannot create a collaborative team if everyone else believes collaboration is only the leader's responsibility. So we also have to have those those spaces for that productive conflict. All right. Every team is going to have some conflict. That's just how it happens, but it needs to be productive. All right. Every interaction that you have, every meeting, every side conversation contributes to a team's culture. So, a healthy team cannot be the leader's responsibility alone. Everybody has to contribute. And so, what does a productive response look like when that tension happens, right? Because it's going to happen. And so, I actually think about it in like 3 steps. When something happens, you have like a really quick time limit to decide whether you're going to respond or react. So, pause, check your assumptions. Separate the facts from the interpretations that you have and notice your own reaction, right? Sometimes the best thing that you can do is really give yourself enough space to respond intentionally. And then you're going to talk. So then you're going to address the issue directly. You're going to describe that behavior and explain the impact that it's happening. And then ask questions, right? You're going to listen for them, their perspectives and what's happening. So the goal is not to make the conversation like just comfortable. Some conversations are just going to be comfortable, but the goal is to have productive conversation. And then reset, reconnect to that shared goal of what you're trying to accomplish, that outcome, right? Clarify those expectations and then agree on what needs to happen next. Going back to Rosalie, that develop an action plan. And that's the part that a lot of people miss. You know, we have these conversations and then nothing is actually different. So we talk about the problem, we have this long conversation about why we're so frustrated, but then never actually establish a different way forward. So I want you to also think about this, that the goal is not to win the disagreement. The goal is to really move the work and the relationship forward because both of them matter, right? If I get my work done but destroy trust, well, that's a problem. But if I protect the relationship by avoiding every difficult conversation, then accountability might suffer. Healthy teams need both. We need to be able to work through disagreements and work through the tension. So yeah, I already said that. Sorry. Um, so as we close today, I really want you to remember that the goal is not to create a team where everyone is just working the same way, right? Different people will bring those different styles and the perspectives and the approaches. And honestly, making everyone the same is going to be boring and it's also impossible. So it's not going to make us any better, right? The diversity of thought can really strengthen a team. So the goal is not to eliminate that tension, is to handle it in a way that really protects the team and keeps that trust and those differences, we're handling them intentionally. So if you take three things away from this conversation today, then I want you to check your assumptions. Before deciding why someone did something, ask yourself what you actually know about the situation. Talk about what happened and the impact instead of defining who someone is. Address the behavior, not the personality. And then return to that shared goal, right? When things get tense, ask yourself, what are we trying to accomplish? The goal is not to eliminate that tension, it's really to just handle it in a way that protects the team. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Think, or what is one relationship or a team dynamic you can approach differently this week? Really think about that one relationship or that team dynamic that has been more difficult than you would like lately. You don't need to tell us who, right? Just ask yourself, what is one thing that you could do to approach it differently maybe this week? Maybe you need to check an assumption. Maybe you need to address something directly, or you need to clarify an expectation, or maybe just listen, right? Listen for their perspectives. Because multiple personalities are always going to exist on a team, right? Yeah, have patience, exactly. And the goal is not to make those personalities the same, right? Really be intentional about how we're addressing differences on the team. And we want to be able to take the people who have those differences and work through tension and still move forward together because those, like I said, that diversity of thought is really, really beneficial, right? We all have different experiences. I know on our team, we are constantly bouncing things off of each other and we are so much better because of it. And so I want to thank you for joining me today. We have another webinar tomorrow with Lane Mears. It's going to be about making decisions with imperfect information. And so I hope you are able to join us tomorrow for that. But really, reach out to our team for any team trainings or view the website to view any upcoming trainings. Our September ones are posted. If you are not on our list to receive the webinars each month, we send that out every month. Let me know, send me a message, send Anita a message, and we really hope to see you soon.